Here we go. Okay, so yeah, we've got a very confusing family tree here for Stephen of Blois. Blois. It starts up here with William the First, originally Duke of Normandy, then of course King of England, William the Conqueror, and it comes down to his family line until we get King Henry the First here. Here's his sons, Robert, William the Second, and Henry the First. Now, Henry, as I say, his sons should have taken over, but they died on the White Ship as it sailed towards England. It sank in the English Channel, and there goes the bloodline. And so Henry is left only with daughters, one of whom is called Matilda. We will come to her in a bit. Now, his closest male relative is Stephen. Now, he's over in France, and he gets ready, and pretty much as soon as Henry dies, he comes across the Channel and quite peacefully takes the crown, and he rules for a few years in relative peace. But that doesn't mean that everybody's happy with King Stephen's rule. Oh, no, 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 no. He's going to go to war with this woman over here. Her name is Empress Matilda, a very fine and fancy name. Now, Matilda is Henry I's daughter. So if the medieval world wasn't quite so sexist, Matilda should have become Queen of England because she was the oldest surviving child of Henry I. But of course, because she is female, that wasn't good enough back then. You had to be a man to be King of England. I suppose you still technically have to be a man to be King of England anyway, but you know what I mean, ruler of England. It is very confusing. It's a confusing family tree. So let's try and keep it simple. Stephen, he is the nephew of King Henry, and Matilda, she is the daughter. And this family is going to go to war in a period that we call the Anarchy. Ooh. So anarchy, in some senses, in the sense that we're using today, anarchy means no rules, a breakdown of all civil order, everyone fighting everyone else. And so England is going to be ravaged by anarchy for something like 13 years. We're going to have problems here. Now, Matilda, she is called Empress Matilda, not because she is the Empress of England. She never is, because England has never had an emperor or an empress. But Matilda, earlier in her life, she goes and marries the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which is a great big empire that stretches over a lot of modern Germany, Austria, northern Italy. So she becomes a very powerful woman because she is married to the emperor. Arguably, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire is far more powerful than the King of England. And so she is called Empress. Unfortunately, the emperor dies after a few years of marriage, and so Matilda is left with no real position in the Holy Roman Empire. She has no relatives there other than her dead husband, and of course that doesn't count anymore because he's dead. So she has to go and find someone else to marry, and she does, and she decides that she would quite like to take over England, because of course England belonged to her dad, and she's the oldest child, and she doesn't see why being a woman would get in the way of taking the power for herself. Oh, this behind me, this will appear in our story later today. I'm live from Canterbury Cathedral, Canterbury being a city down in Kent, with a very famous Norman cathedral. You can see the cathedral behind me was commissioned and at least begun to be built by King William I himself, in the Romanesque style. Oh yes, lots of symmetrical blocky shapes to try and represent the power of the Roman Empire long before the time of 1066. William I, he saw himself as really quite an important Roman kind of guy, like a super fighter and soldier, and he built his buildings to represent this power. In other words, it's a great big church. Yeah. Oh yes, Josh, we will come to that in a minute. Very good. Now, the Empress Matilda then, she isn't just a woman, she is a woman with armies, and to be honest, she's a woman who's very capable at leading armies. And she will bring them across the Channel from France after taking a lot of the English land in France, because of course, if we remember, Normandy, England, all one country at this time, so bit of France, bit of England, all one thing. Matilda, she takes down a lot of that stuff. She takes castle after castle after castle over there in France, and then she comes over the Channel. Now, James says she's a bit like Boudicca, and I suppose she is. Boudicca is a famous female ruler of Britain who was very good with armies and, fought back against the Roman Empire. So, yeah, I think that's a good way to say that. Yeah. You'll see in a bit, Taylor, why there's a cathedral in the back. There will be great drama in the cathedral a bit later. Okay. Yes, not quite the Tower of London. The Tower of London, I believe, is a bit taller and in London. Yes. Yeah, this is very much a cathedral. Yes, the house of God. Okay, so now Stephen, he has some problems in England already. The King of Scotland is constantly attacking. King Malcolm of Scotland at this point. I can't remember which Malcolm it is. My Scottish kings are not so clear in my head. But one of the Malcolms is constantly invading from the north, so Stephen has to deal with him. At the same time, rebels from Wales are being all Welsh and rebellious, and they're trying to come over from Wales and take down England as well. And so poor old Stephen, he's kind of trapped in the middle of all these invading forces, and his own cousin, Matilda, is coming for him from over the sea. It's a problem situation. Now, Stephen doesn't help himself out. He makes matters worse for him. He's afraid that some of the English lords are going to attack him as well, that they are going to rebel. And he tries to deal with this in a couple of ways. Good morning, Heidi. What he does is he tries to, first of all, he makes lots more earls. By this point, England is divided into 6 earldoms, and each of those huge areas of England is ruled over by an earl who is like the step down from a king, really. They have a lot of control over their part of England. Stephen, he divides up those earldoms and makes more earls, so there are more people with power. Now, in theory, at least in his head, this is a good idea, because now he has more trusted advisors around him with armies who can help him out. The only problem is, what happens if those earls decide that they don't like Stephen, and instead they like Matilda? He could just be creating enemies for himself. He also decides to attack castles and to steal castles from members of the church. He gets into a lot of trouble from this because he thinks that the church leaders, they might rebel against him, so he takes away their power, which actually just makes them angrier, or at least some of them. Yeah. Now, Laura here is saying that Stephen was nice and just, and Matilda was cold and cruel. Now, there is some truth to this. One of the problems with Stephen is that Stephen, he might have been a nice guy. You might have liked to have him over at Christmas, but you wouldn't really want him as a king, because he's really kind and generous. He isn't very good at the whole law and order thing. He's more likely to pardon a criminal, let a criminal off because he feels sorry for them, than he is to sentence them to punishment. He gives away a lot of gold, land, things like that, which sounds very generous, and it is, but it also starts to break his power down. So Stephen is often seen as like too kind and too gentle to be a good king. I'll let you decide whether that's, you can be too kind and too gentle to be a king, but that was, at least at the time, that was what a lot of people thought. They wanted someone strong in charge, someone who was going to steer the ship, strong and stable government, and that would have been, of course, Empress Matilda. She didn't take no nonsense from nobody. Oh yeah. So, overcomes Matilda from France, and there's this huge war starts up. Now, it's not a simple war. It's not a straightforward Emma versus Stephen showdown because there's so many different moving pieces. We've got the Scots are still invading. The Welsh team up with Matilda. Some of Stephen's lords team up with Stephen. Some of them team up with Matilda. And over the years, they swap sides constantly. So it's really hard to keep track of who's fighting who, which is why it's called the anarchy. Yeah, the anarchy in this sense just means complete chaos. Nobody knows what's going on. There are battles happening all the time, here, there, and everywhere. And really, it's the poor people, it's the peasants, the normal, everyday people that suffer most. Because whilst these two people, Stephen, Matilda, are fighting for who gets to rule England, the normal people are kind of getting forgotten. You know, they have to join the armies when they're told to. They have their stuff stolen by soldiers who want to eat. There's no one where to go to. You know, if you have a legal problem, if someone's done something wrong to you, the courts aren't working very well because, well, part of the time Stephen's in prison, and part of the time he's king, but no one can get to him because he's stuck in a castle with Matilda's armies outside, and sometimes Matilda's stuck in a castle with Stephen's army outside, and it gets all crazy. Willow's asking, did people kill people on their own side? There were moments when, yes, you'd be in a battle, you know, I don't know, the Earl of Leicester would be fighting alongside the Earl of Gloucester, and all of a sudden Gloucester would turn around and start fighting Leicester, you know, and just complete nonsense. No one really knows what's going on. Now, at one point in this war, Matilda captures Stephen and puts him in prison, closes the gate. Done. Matilda then, she decides she will go to London, and there she will be crowned Queen of England. But if you notice, we haven't got some dates for Matilda because she never is Queen of England. She gets quite unlucky. She's got Stephen beaten. He's in prison, locked up. She goes to London to try and she's given the keys of Winchester, which is the second most powerful and important city in the land. So she's all ready to go. She goes to London, but friends of Stephen are in London, and they start whispering and spreading rumours, and they start agitating, which means riling up the people of London. And so when Matilda gets there, there's a full-scale riot. The people of London, the normal townsfolk and, well, city folk, they start to scream and protest and stamp and set things on fire and say that they will not stand for a Queen of England and that she'd better get out of London now if she values her life. So poor old Matilda, she has to leave London, not having been made Queen, because the people of London hate her, or at least that's what they're saying. So, it's about this point that Matilda's brother, or is it stepbrother, half-brother, something like that, one of her right-hand man called Richard, he is captured by Stephen's side, because even though Stephen is in prison, Stephen's wife has got an army and she's fighting back. So now we've just got, you know, even more anarchy on anarchy. Now her brother is captured, and so he's in prison under Stephen's side, and Stephen's in prison under Matilda's side, and they can't decide what to do, so they make a trade. Matilda's brother, he's let out of prison, Stephen is left out of prison, and the two of them swap over. A prisoner swap, yeah. Brother-in-law. Thank you, Zoe and Aidan. Now, so it's all a bit of a mess, and the fighting continues for a bit, but both these people can see, both Stephen and Matilda, that, you know, what they're doing is no good for the country, and eventually, you know, one of them's going to get killed doing this. So they come to a compromise, and it's quite a straightforward compromise. It's quite a sensible compromise. Now, it has to be said that this compromise is only really coming after a lot of important, you know, family members of both these guys, remember they're related anyway, are dead. So it's not as if they come to a compromise out of purely rational, sensible means, but they definitely do decide to stop the fight. And the thing that they decide on is that Stephen, he will get to be King of England for as long as he lives, but when he dies, Matilda's son takes over, not Stephen's son, yeah? Which is why there is only one of the House of Blois in our tree of monarchs. We've got the Normans, then we've got Blois, and then we go to another family, which are the Plantagenets. So poor old Stephen, he gets to be king. He gets to be the king until he dies naturally. But his line ends there, and Matilda's line takes back up, which is truer to the Norman line, to be fair. Now, poor old Stephen. He dies after some kind of stomach upset. Um, in his home down in the southwest of England, I believe. And that's the end of him. It's not a very dramatic death, no lampreys, no shootings, no exploding corpses. No, he's quite straightforward, is poor old Stephen. He gets a bad tummy and he dies. There you go. And of course, he then leads the way to the next king. Oh yes, goodbye Stephen, goodbye Matilda, adios. Here we have Henry II, Matilda's daughter. Son, he's not a girl. That would be weird. All right, thank you, Salia. Oh, Taylor has a pink dragon. That is nice. I wish I had a pink dragon. Yes, the nice king is gone. But not a very effective king, to be fair. I mean, it's all very well being a nice guy, but if you're going to bring civil war down on the country for years, then it's not used so much, is it? Yes, he pretty much is Henry I, isn't he? He does look like Henry I. Hang on, is it actually the same picture? Let's have a look. Oh, it is actually. Which one is it? Oh no, is that one? Let me find Henry II. Back off, Henry I. They do look very similar, but not quite that similar. Here we go. Let's find me a picture of Henry II proper. Here we go. They do look pretty similar. Here we are. Where is he? There he is. There we go. Hello, second Henry. Suspiciously like your father, but not quite the same. Yes, there will be an amazing wife, a truly amazing wife, one of the most amazing medieval people, let alone men or women. So, this is Henry II. Henry II, the good thing about Henry II, and there are lots of good things, he's a chip off the old block. He's like Henry I. He's big on law and order, so he's a big counterpoint to Stephen. If Stephen's not particularly, strict, Henry is very much strict, but at the same time, he seems to be quite fair. That's right, Laura, yes. He sets up and establishes more courts. He makes sure that the court system is working better. And to be honest, I think most of the people of England are fairly relieved by this after the literal chaos of the last decade and a bit. So, yeah, Henry brings stability to England, for sure. Now, as a person, he has issues, anger issues in particular. We've got to remember that Henry II is the grandson, yes, of William I. Now, William I, as we found out, was incredibly violent, incredibly angry. Some might even say psychopathic. Henry I, his dad, Henry II's dad, is, a stern, angry figure, also wrapped in grief when his sons die. And so Henry II, he's a chip off the old block there. He's got these proper anger issues. He will fly into rages a lot. But he does bring stability. So that's something at least. Now, a bit of a reminder, everyone we've talked about today, they still speak French. Yeah, these are not English-speaking kings. These are not kings who have, a particular love for England. A lot of them, at least not the peasants of England. They like the land of England and they like the money that England gives them through taxes. But they're not, we wouldn't say that they were English and proud. Yeah, these are French and proud. These kings. It will still be a fair few kings along before we find one that truly starts to get English, as we might describe it today. Oh, Willow's asking if there will be any queens. Yes, there will be queens. The first Queen of England, though, isn't until the Tudor times when we get Lady Jane Grey and then Mary I. So it's going to be a little while before we get to queens. Hopefully, this woman here on the screen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, hopefully she'll make up for it, though, because she's pretty amazing, as you'll see. So, yeah, don't be too disheartened. So Kai is asking why all these kings are French. Because William the First, he conquers from Normandy. And to be honest, by the time he gets to England and conquers, most of the rulers of England, Edward the Confessor, he would have spoken mostly French anyway. He would at least been fluent in it. He probably would have spoken English too. But the families of England and France, at least northern France, are like this. We can also add in the Vikings like this. And it all comes back to a woman called Emma of Normandy. Oh, there you are, a third important woman. If we go way back in time, to before Edward the Confessor was even king. So we started in 1066. We need to go back about 20 years or so before that. There was a woman called Emma of Normandy. Her name was Emma, and she came from Normandy, which is northern France. Now, she was a very important woman in British history because she married a Viking king, King Canute. She had 2 Viking sons who became king, Arthur Canute and Harold Harefoot. She also, though, after Canute died, married an English person and had another son called Edward, Edward the Confessor. Now, that means that she is the mother, well, the husband to, what, 1 king of England, father of 3 kings of England, something like that. And because of that, all the kings of England, they have her blood, her French blood running through them, yeah? So they all speak French. They all, have lands in Normandy. And if we'd gone back to this period in history and asked people, what is England? A lot of people, at least the rich people, would say, well, it's part of France, yeah? It's that, you've got England, you've got Normandy as one country. They're very much the same kind of thing. The people in England, the peasants, wouldn't have said that. They would have said, no, get off our land. But no one ever listened to the peasants because, what do? Just like hit you with a turnip. Not that scary. Reuben, I don't know why. I hadn't put my hat on today. Hadn't even thought about it. I don't know. Maybe it's just not a hat day today. So, back to Henry II. He has anger issues. Oh dear, some people are having sound difficulty. Let me know if you can hear, please, guys. Poor peasants. It's always the poor peasants. No one remembers them. Okay, that's good. Thank you, Jasper. Okay. So these anger issues he has, part of it is because of his character, I think. He's related to a line of bloodthirsty kings who are used to getting their own way. Partly, he just has a lot of power, so no one can stop him when he gets angry anyway. And he's got another third issue, is that Henry is always drinking alcohol. He is drinking a lot of wine, a lot of beer, mainly wine, because, of course, that's what the richer people do. But yes, he's drinking all the time, so these anger issues can really, show themselves as violent outbursts. Now, he has, though, in his young life, before, yes, he gets drunk a lot. Yes, that's the problem, or one of the problems. And to be fair, kings did back then, So he's got a friend called Thomas, his best friend. They grow up together. They're always larking about. They're always having fun. And they especially like to have great big feasts. They like to go out hunting, and they like to drink a lot of wine. So him and Thomas, best of friends. This goes on for a very, very long time. As Henry becomes king, he's still best friends with Thomas, They love each other. BFFs. Oh, yes. Now, he's got his best friend Thomas then. He also gets married to this woman here, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So she is a queen of France. Oui, oui. She's an incredibly important woman. She was married to King Louis of France, which made her the Queen of France. But then, after going off on crusade with him, more on the crusades next time when we look at Richard the Lionheart, when she goes off with crusades with her husband, the King of France, they basically decide that they don't like each other anymore, and they get what is called an annulment. Their marriage is scrapped. Bit like a divorce, but divorce is illegal under the Catholic Church, so an annulment it is. So she stops being Queen of France, and within something like 9 months, or maybe, no, 9 weeks, something like that, she gets married to this guy here, Henry II, yeah? So she already, in her wonderful long life, she will live until she's 80 years old. Eleanor has been Queen of France, and now she is Queen of England too. So a double queen. Pretty cool. The only woman in history to be both Queen of France and Queen of England in her lifetime. So that's pretty cool. Or in history. So she's a very strong woman. And he's got her on one side. She's an incredible political superstar. She's incredibly clever. She's very used to queening because, of course, she was the Queen of France. She's very brave. I don't know of any other queens who ever went on crusades, at least not before her. A crusade is a battle, a war that was started between the Christians and the Muslims down in the Middle East, more of which we will look at properly next time with Richard I and the Third Crusade. So she's brave, she's competent, and she has very, very powerful connections. Yeah, a bit like Queen Mary, Heidi. Yeah. Laura's telling me that it said Aquitaine. I'm not so sure. I'll try it. Eleanor of Aquitaine. I don't know. Rebecca's asking if we'll have a lesson about our current queen. If we get that far, yes, we will. Yes, we're doing 2 a week. So it will take us a while to get to all the way through to Elizabeth II. And to be honest, I don't know what we do after that. We'd have to start making kings and queens up. Oh, no. All right. So Eleanor, an incredibly powerful woman on one side. He also has his best friend Thomas, by his side on the other. Life, you would have thought, would be quite perfect. But as I said, anger issues. The legends say that at one point, Henry got so angry. He was just having an argument with someone, drinking wine, having an argument in his castle. He gets so incredibly angry that he rips off all his clothes. He gets down on the floor on his hands and knees, starts barking like a dog and eating the straw. Yeah, just like, he's so angry, he just has to bite stuff. Yeah, that's the level of anger we're talking here. I don't know, I'm not sure if it's recorded what he was even angry at then. It was just, that's an example of his extreme rage. He would just lose it. Physically, he would just have to rip his clothes off and just roar around on the floor a bit. Yeah, so that's the kind of guy we're talking about. He's not always like that. He's not like in full-on rage mode the whole time, but he can rage with the best of them. Oh, yes. So he's someone you've got to watch out for. Now, when he becomes king, it's not long after that he needs to get himself a new Archbishop of Canterbury. Yes, Eleanor, like a big toddler. Yes. The Archbishop of Canterbury, if we remember from last time, is the most important church member in the country. He is the person who is closest to the Pope, the daddy of the church. He is the person who has the most control over the Christians in England. So we can say that the Archbishop of Canterbury is the second most powerful in man or person in England next to the king. It kind of goes king, archbishop. And behind me here, this is the Archbishop's Cathedral, still there today, of course, but an incredible building built for a very powerful man. Some people are saying I'm cracking up. Let me just see if I can. There we go. That might be a bit better now. So Laura, he needs a new archbishop because the old one dies. Yeah, and unlike kingship, when a bishop or archbishop dies, it doesn't go to their family. They're not supposed to be having a family, most of them. So, well, any of them. So instead, it goes to, at this time in history, the king decides who the next one is, usually under advice from the church. So the bishops will come, and maybe some other important archbishops like the Archbishop of York will come and suggest names to him. But essentially, it's in this case, it's Henry's choice, yeah? And Henry hits on a master plan. Oh, yeah, because Henry's got a best mate. Can you imagine what it would be like if you are the King of England and your very best mate is the second most powerful guy in the world, or in the country, the Archbishop? And this is what Henry thinks is a perfect idea. Him and Thomas, they get on so well. They always agree on stuff. They're always having fun. So Henry would be able to do the king part. Thomas will be able to do the Archbishop part, and together they'll be the dream team. Yeah, they'll be unstoppable, because that's all of the power in England, church and state, put together in one great big BFF package. Oh yeah. And so, without further ado, Henry makes who are we talking about? We're talking about Henry II. Sorry, Mary. We're talking about King Henry II and his friend Thomas. I tell you what, I'll bring up a little picture of Thomas since we're talking about him. Here we go. Let's try and find a nice picture of Thomas. All right. Oh dear. That's sort of surprisingly hard. Here we go. Here's an image of Thomas that isn't too crazy. There we are. That's him. St. Thomas Becket of Canterbury. There we are. So Thomas and Henry, best friends. Henry is the king. Thomas is now Archbishop. But then everything goes wrong. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. Because the plan was that Thomas would be the Archbishop, and he would basically just agree with Henry on everything, because that's what he always does. Yeah. But something weird happened. When Thomas became Archbishop, he started listening to the other bishops. He started to properly read the Bible. He started to listen to what his Pope was saying. And he decided to take it very, very seriously. No longer has Henry got a best mate who will come and drink wine all day with him. No, no, no. Thomas is too busy. He's praying in the church. He's making sure that he's helping the poor people. He's making sure that the laws of the church are followed. And Henry says, "Come on, Thomas, I want some more money. Can you just grab some from the church for me?" And Thomas is like, "Oh no, I'm terribly sorry, but I cannot do that, Henry. I am far too religious now." Like a monk or something. And so poor old Henry, he's kind of like, "Oh, I have no power over the church. I thought my best friend was going to sort me out, but my best friend has turned against me and has fallen in love with Jesus instead. Grr." And of course, we all know what kind of man Henry is. He's kind of angry. He's kind of crawling around on the floor like a dog, angry. Oh, poor Henry. Yes. So, the two of them are going to fall out multiple times over the next few years. Thomas, he will not back down. Yeah, he wants to be a proper archbishop, one who will be remembered for being holy. He does not want to be an archbishop who's remembered as just doing what the king says. At the same time, Henry's so frustrated because the only reason he gave Thomas that job was because he loved hanging out with Thomas, and now Thomas has gone and turned all weird on him, in his opinion. Yeah. Now, Thomas goes even further. He starts to try and behave like the old church fathers. It's said that he will wear really spiky, prickly clothes that rub and hurt him on purpose to try and feel the pain and suffering of Christ. So, in other words, he becomes really, really serious. Yeah. What year is this in? Good question. Yeah, let me have a look for you. So, the year that we're coming up to is we're coming up to 1170. So let's say that we're in about we're in the late or mid to late 860s at this point. 1160s, sorry, at this point. So Thomas is doing his religious thing. Henry's doing his kinging thing. The two of them aren't getting on. Now, at one point, Henry gets so angry with Thomas that he has him exiled. He kicks him out. He says, "Get out of my country and do not come back. I do not want an archbishop. I do not want you. I don't need you anyway, Thomas. All right, I've got other friends now. I don't need you and your Bible." And he sends him away to France. He says he's not allowed in his kingdom anymore. Oh, in this picture, Alfred, Thomas is holding a cross to represent the cross that Christ was crucified on, and the Holy Bible here as well. There you go. That's what he's holding. So, and he will be 6. Who will be 6? I'm so confused. So, Yeah, this is Thomas, his friend. So this is Henry. This is his best friend Thomas. But this is his best friend Thomas when Thomas has turned all super religious. Oh dear. And so Thomas has to go to France under threat of horrible death if he ever comes back to England. And the two of them don't speak for a long time. But a few years later, Thomas Thomas writes to Henry, and Henry writes to Thomas, and they remember that they love each other really, or at least more accurately, the Pope sends a letter to Henry and tells him to sort himself out and let Thomas back, or the Pope will get angry with him. So Henry lets Thomas come back. He comes back from France. He takes up his old job as Archbishop of Canterbury. But the problems, they just come back. Oh dear. Oh, Heidi's asking who is the Pope. The Pope is the leader of the church. So if you imagine all the countries in Europe, they have their own kings or emperors, yeah, and they're the people in charge of the countries. But all of Europe at this point, or at least all of Western Europe, they are what we call Roman Catholics. They are a type of Christian called Roman Catholics. And all of those Christians are led by one man. Still the same today. There are about 1 billion Catholics on the planet, and they're all led by one man, and his title is the Pope, which just comes from the Greek pape, daddy. Yeah, he's the daddy. So he's the daddy of the church. He lives in Rome. It's very, very rare for a pope to visit England. Even in the medieval times, it never really happened. We only ever had one English pope. Usually they were Italian or French, sometimes other things. I think there was only one ever English pope in history so far. So what the Pope says, he's in charge in a way of all the kings of Europe. If the Pope says to a king, stop doing that, the kings generally follow. Yeah, they generally do as they're told. Oh, brilliant. So James here is telling me that he went to the Vatican, which is, of course, where the Pope lives and did live back then. That's brilliant, James. Yeah, I bet you saw some amazing stuff there. I'd like to go. Yeah. I have not heard of Gauss. I don't think so. No. Sorry, Talia. So who is the Pope at this time? That's a good question. My knowledge of the different popes throughout history is quite limited because I know a few of them, but let's see, who is the Pope in 1170? Pope Alexander III would be the Pope that we're interested in right now. I don't know much about him, to be honest, because the thing with popes is that there are way more of them than there are kings, because popes, they tend to get the job when they're already pretty old. So most popes, they only last for a few years, and then they die and get replaced by the next pope. And so there have been a lot of popes in history. A lot of kings of England have to deal with 2 or 3 popes within their lifetime. Trying to remember the exact list of popes is pretty difficult. As well, as we go around this period, there are things like papal assassinations, as popes are being killed by rivals, and it all goes a bit down. So to spell the word Pope, here we go. If I can get my pen, here we are. So the word Pope is spelled like this. P-O-P-E, Pope. There you go. Yeah, there we are. Oh yes, and popes still exist. The current pope is Pope Francis the something or other. And in my lifetime, I can remember, hang on, I think this is the 3rd pope since I've been alive. Yeah. So popes, they do go through quite quickly because they generally start the job quite old. There can only ever be one pope. At some times in history, there was what was called an anti-pope. Some French popes, they decided that they were the real popes, and the real pope was the fake pope, and the fake pope decided that he was the real pope, and there was a big pope war. But for most of history, there has only been one pope, and even during the pope anti-pope time, that people still only believed in one pope each. Just some people believed in the French one and some people believed in the Italian one. But yes, the pope does exist. There will always be a pope, I assume, as long as there are Catholics. 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare a pope war. That's what Jasper says. I like it. Okay. So the Pope then, we've just gone on a Pope tangent. I like it. The Pope, he's not happy. He demands that Thomas comes back, but the two of them, they still don't get on, Henry's hoping that Thomas will be a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more chill. Thomas is still very much, I am super religious. So it all comes to a head in 1170. There are two versions of this story. We'll go with the official government-sanctioned version first. Henry, he's there in his castle with some mates, not Thomas. Thomas, why? He's there in his castle having a drink, having a discussion with his friends, and all of a sudden he gets very angry, and he starts raging, and he starts shouting, and he starts stomping around the place. And he shouts out, because he's shouting about Thomas. He's going, "Oh, that annoying priest. I hate him. He's so horrible. Oh, he's always winding me up. He used to be so cool, and now he's such a, I just don't like him." And so he shouts out, "Won't someone rid me of this troublesome priest?" Now, cut to a few meters away, where some knights are hanging out, and they hear the king shouting, will someone not rid me of this troublesome priest? And they think, hey, we're knights, we're good at ridding stuff, that's what we do. So they jump on their horses and they ride off to Canterbury Cathedral, the most holy place in England, the most important religious building, and the home, of course, of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, they then proceed to do the unthinkable, because the most holy of places is Canterbury Cathedral. Any cathedral, any church is supposed to be a sacred, holy place where, prayer happens, basically, and nothing else. You're not supposed to be violent in a church. Oh dear, can we see what's coming? But these four knights, it's a dark, stormy night, apparently. And these knights, they ride up to the cathedral. They smash open the doors very rudely, and they storm in. Now, the cathedral isn't just home to the Archbishop. We're getting there, Armani. They do this place is not just home to the Archbishop. There's lots of other priests and monks around the place, and these knights storm through and they start shouting, "Where is Thomas? We are going to kill him. We have been sent by the king. Huzzah!" Now the priests, they try and get in the way. They try and shout, "No, no, leave Thomas alone." But the knights, they roughly push them all away. Now, priests, of course, they're not armed with weapons. These are guys in cassocks, like dresses, with bald heads, and the most dangerous thing they've got really is a particularly heavy Bible, I guess. So they're not putting up much resistance. Now, Thomas, he's in the center of the cathedral, and he sees these knights coming, and he bows his head in prayer. He starts to pray to God for protection. Or maybe we can be charitable. Maybe he's praying to God for the souls of these knights. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. I don't know. He grabs hold of the pillar, or a pillar in the cathedral. So this pillar is like, just holding up the ceiling. So he grabs hold of it, and he's in prayer, and the knights come up and they roughly drag him away. One of the knights cuts into his arm, the next knight cuts into his neck, and poor old Thomas dies there in the cathedral. Oh dear. Now, the knights, they're all laughing about this, and they're like, "Hurrah, we've done what the king wanted, huzzah!" The legend goes that one of them pokes his sword into the brain of St. Thomas and sort of makes a mess of it with his point of his sword, just to make his point, and then they stomp out of the cathedral, the other priests and monks all wailing and crying and, panicking because their leader is now dead, just killed within minutes by these just random knights who have come through the door. And this means, of course, that Henry has got something to answer for. You do not kill the Archbishop of Canterbury. No, no, no. You don't kill a normal priest, to be fair. You certainly don't go into the most holy place in the country and kill the most holy man. Ha, that's it, Josh. He made a point using the point of his sword. Yes, yes, yes. So poor old Thomas, dead on the floor of the cathedral. Now, if, and they did, when asked, Henry says, I didn't tell anyone to go and kill them. No, I didn't. I was just having a polite conversation with my friends. These knights, they went off on a crazy rampage. They completely misunderstood what was going on. Idiot knights. But that's a bit suspicious because the knights themselves, they say that actually, they were just doing what the king wanted. They were being good knights. The job of a knight is to follow the orders of the king, and it seemed to them as if the king was directly asking them to go and kill the archbishop. Now, we still don't know today which version is true. Did the king ask the knights to go and kill him, or did the king just, angrily make a statement and the knights got the wrong end of the stick? I don't know. Either way, this is 1170, Elijah. 1170 this happens. Either way, the archbishop is dead. Now, it does get a bit more suspicious because these four knights who have done the most terrible crime in medieval history, it's about as bad as you can get this. I suppose the only thing that could have been worse was maybe killing the king in the cathedral. I suppose if you killed the king, that'd be slightly worse, but we're talking pretty close to these terrible crimes, each of these crimes to each other. You would have thought that Henry would maybe have them executed. He might have them killed for being so mean and so terrible, such murderers. Yeah, to kill an unarmed priest in the cathedral, that's a terrible thing to do. Instead, what Henry does is he punishes them by sending them on holiday. Bum, bum, bum. He says, right, guys, you've been very naughty. You need to go on a pilgrimage, a holy journey to Europe to get closer to God and to say sorry. So these four knights, they leave England, and they're not even death by holiday, just punishment by holiday. Yeah, Eleanor says death by holiday, not quite. They go off on their pilgrimage, they go and say sorry in the churches of Europe, and then they come back home and I assume get on with their lives. So not a particularly severe punishment for such a severe crime, which doesn't look good on Henry. You'd have thought if they really had gone off without Henry's orders, then he would have dealt with them far more savagely. Yeah, this is a man who gets angry. So we can imagine at this point that Henry is kind of happy, kind of sad. His best friend is dead, but to be honest, his best friend hadn't been his best friend for a long time. Sad times, sad times. Now, all the way through this, this is a very small part of Henry's reign, of course. It's the famous part of his reign, his relationship with Thomas. But there are other things going on. Captain Toad, exclamation mark. Yes, there'll be lessons this week as normal, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Yes, I haven't decided what myth to do on Friday yet. I'm going to have to think. Tomorrow in geography, we're going to have a look at China for C. And then, there we go. During all this, Henry II is being a fairly good king. His law and order is pretty good. He's building up the strength of England. He's fixing England because, England has been ripped apart by Stephen and Matilda's fighting. So he's doing quite good. He's got a huge bonus in the fact that he has his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who is just like a political mastermind. She's incredible. And so she helps him to rule wisely. If he's the one that's going off and getting drunk and getting angry and rolling around on the floor like a dog, she's the one who is sensible and thinking things through and making the proper decisions. So together they're quite a good pairing, and England during this time does prosper and become stronger and safer. But not everyone likes Henry, and after a while, the relationship between Henry and Eleanor starts to break down a bit because Henry starts to argue with his sons, with his children. Yeah, and he has several sons. I'm trying to remember the name of his oldest son. I want to say Robert, but I'm not sure. Let me remind myself. Let me see. His children are Geoffrey, William, Henry, Matilda, Richard, Geoffrey, Eleanor, Joan, John, and William. Those are his children. So he's got a lot of them. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. Eleanor. So how many children is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 children that they have together. Now, Eleanor herself also has other children with other people. So she ends up being the mother to something like, I don't know, 11, 12 children or something like that. I can't quite remember the number. It's a lot. But yes, so there are a lot of children, and it's Henry who they call the young king. Henry, who should be the next king of England. Unfortunately, he's not going to get that job because he's going to die before he gets it. But his other sons, especially a guy called Richard, they start getting really annoyed. They start getting angry. Yeah, they want to. Richard wants to be the next king. Henry wants to be the next king. Young John, he wants to be the next king. Geoffrey, he's quite happy just being a bishop, so he's chilling over there. But they decide that they'll go to war with their dad. Yeah. So towards the end of Henry's reign, he has to fight actual battles against his own children. And to make matters worse, his children, Richard in particular, who is Eleanor's favourite son, she absolutely loves Richard, she joins forces with his own son against him. So she goes to war with her son against her husband, which is, yeah, I mean, that's a family problem. Understatement of the century, yeah? Now, these wars are going to go on for quite a while, and again, they're not going to be great for Britain. Thankfully, a lot of these wars, or at least the battles, they take place in France, because that's, where these guys live. So you've got to imagine them fighting over France. Henry's armies defending off against one son after another. Eleanor, her and Henry, as you can imagine, they fall out. Eleanor ends up getting put in prison by Henry for 13 years. She will stay in prison. Imagine that, locking up your own wife for 13 years because she tried to kill you with her son. I mean, it's a soap opera waiting to happen, that one. Or a sitcom, La Baguette, could be. They are funny. I don't know. It would have been, it's definitely a dysfunctional family. Now, when I say in prison, Eleanor is in a very nice prison. She's in a nice house with plenty of food and it's nice and warm and stuff, but she's not allowed out to go and cause problems. Eleanor, though, will long outlive Henry II. I'm just going to have a look in my book, actually. I'm not sure how Henry II dies. We've got to say how they all die, don't we? You can't miss that out. So let me find my list of dead kings. That will help me. Now, Eleanor will go on, because, of course, Henry will die, as they all do. Oh, there you are. He died from a bleeding stomach ulcer whilst fighting his sons in France. So there you go. Poor old Henry. Not a nice way to go. Stomachs. Always seems to be the problem with stomachs, doesn't it? Maybe if kings didn't have stomachs, the whole thing would be much better. I don't know. But Eleanor, she will long outlive Henry. When Henry dies of his stomach ulcer, Eleanor finds herself the mother of the next king of England, Richard, and also the mother of the king after that, John. So Eleanor is massively important. She is the Queen of France for a bit, then she's the Queen of England for a long time. She leads armies against the King of England, her own husband, and then she's the mother of 2 more English kings. You couldn't find a more important woman in medieval history, really. She's rivaled by Emma of Normandy and Empress Matilda. Even though we don't have any queens on our list, I think we can agree that the girls are there, and there is a lot of girl power going on. Oh yes. Did Starbucks exist? No, Starbucks is pretty recent. In fact, coffee didn't exist in this part of the world back then. The only people drinking coffee at this time would have been people in the Middle East, I guess. Places like Ethiopia. Tea didn't exist either. No, at least not in Britain. They would have been drinking it in China, but not in Britain. No. So, if you're drinking at this time in history, you are pretty much drinking wine if you're rich or beer if you're poor. It wasn't usually a good idea to drink water unless you're going to boil it first, because the water sources weren't clean like our own tap water is. So most people drank, weak beer would have been a very, very common drink, and river water and stuff. Cool. All right, so next time we will look at those two wonderful sons of Henry II, Richard I, Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart, and wicked, feeble King John. So if you want to do anything in preparation, go watch a film about Robin Hood, because it's Robin Hood time next time. Yeah, Richard and John, the kings of Robin Hood. Thank you very much, guys. It's been wonderful talking to you again this morning, and I hope you will have a wonderful day. Bye.